So this was way back in 2014. I was a 20-year-old community college student living with my parents in Southern California. I had a tight-knit group of stoner friends. There were 5 of us, myself included. And we're all still best friends today, even. Like all suburban kids, our days hanging out usually consisted of just loitering in parking lots, getting stoned, and going to parties when we could. We had a few smoke pots around town that we would go to and get high at. Our main spot was a place that we called the Sewer Lair. It was a giant storm tunnel at the end of a trail in this canyon area behind one of the local neighborhoods. It was secluded, and we could be as loud as we wanted to since there were no houses nearby. The tunnel was maybe 20 feet in diameter, I would guess. A small stream of water ran down the center of it, though. There was this offshoot directly to the right, just past the entrance, that led to another smaller tunnel system too. And this is where we would hang out. We would come here almost every night, in fact. So one night, we were at the Sewer Lair. It was maybe around 1 o'clock in the morning, and we would usually hang out pretty late and wait for our parents to go to sleep so we don't come home and have to see them smelling like weed and cigarettes and whatnot. Me and the boys were smoking, talking, and listening to music. The usual. Except this night, water was draining from one of the tunnel systems further down. It was pretty loud. It sounded like a small waterfall almost. This happened a few times before, so we didn't think anything of it. We don't get much rain in California, so it made sense that this would only happen once in a while. But a few hours in, one of the guys kept looking over at the main tunnel and says that he thinks that he's hearing voices. We tell him that it's just the music and our voices echoing, but we turn off the music and listen silently to prove that he's just stoned and being paranoid. We listen closely, and we could actually hear these faint voices too. It was difficult to hear because of the waterfall, but it sounded like a group of people chanting, maybe? We froze, though, and we traded glances. We sat in silence and listened for a few minutes. One of the bros finally snapped and insisted that we go check it out. A few of the bros were scared, though, and didn't want to do it, but after some bickering, we decided to go and see what was happening. There were 5 of us. What could go wrong? So we used the flashlights on our phones, and we make our way down the tunnel. We must have walked for about 15 minutes, and the chanting got louder, but it still sounded very far away. We still couldn't make out what they were saying because the waterfall was so loud, but it was definitely a group of people speaking in unison. We walked for a while longer, and at this point, we made it so far that there wasn't even graffiti on the walls or trash on the ground anymore. As we continued walking, we noticed that the tunnel was getting warmer. But it was always really cold in here, so it was strange that the temperature was gradually rising the further we went in. We kept moving, though. The chanting was getting so loud that we knew that we were close. It was loud enough to realize that the chanting was in a different language and that it had to be at least 4 or 5 people as well. We kept moving and noticed the graffiti on the wall started to show up again. And this time it was very different than before. It was all very eerie. I immediately brushed it off as just edgy kids trying to scare people, but the further we walked, the more unsettling the markings on the walls became. It was a lot of weird sort of occult-type stuff, and then we noticed that there were melted black candles scattered on the ground with these weird trinkets around them. The trinkets looked handmade and were made of animal bones, string and cloth by the looks of things. We were all quietly inspecting the area when one of the guys points down the tunnel and tells us to cut the lights. We quickly turn off the flashlights and we look, and we could see a faint flickering orange light far down the tunnel. It was just barely visible because it was so far, but we could tell that the light was coming from either candles or torches by the way that it was flickering. It wasn't a direct light either, so it had to be coming from one of the offshoots in the tunnel. Our phones were all getting low on battery now, so we started speed walking toward the orange light. The chanting continued. But then, out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream bellowed from the tunnel up ahead. We all froze and we put our lights down immediately. It was the most terrifying scream that I've ever heard in my life to date. I couldn't even tell if it was human or an animal. But the chanting continued, and then another horrifying scream echoed down the tunnel. The guys were ready to get the heck out of there, but I insisted that we should definitely check this out. I mean, what if somebody's in trouble? I led the way as we slowly walked toward the light. The chanting and the screaming continued. We made it about 30 feet from the offshoot that the light and the voices were coming from. The tunnel was really hot at this point too, and it just smelled absolutely awful. The air was really thick and it was difficult to breathe now as well. We were sweating and it felt like we were suffocating. But we inched our way toward the offshoot as the chanting continued, flinching every time there was another awful scream. The screams had become increasingly more violent and non-human sounding. We were all lined up with our backs against the wall of the main tunnel in front of the offshoot. The chanting and the screams were coming from right around the corner now, and the boys gestured at me to take a peek. I took a big, deep breath. My heart was absolutely pounding. And then I quickly peeked in for a second and then pulled back. Now, this offshoot was exactly like the one at the entrance that we would hang out at, and what I saw at the center was a naked man on his knees with his hands on the ground and his back to me. He was covered in dirt and sweat, and he was in front of what looked like some kind of a handcrafted altar. The walls were covered in writing. The whole area had crowds of black candles lining the walls, and they were all lit. There had to be at least 50 or 60 of them, I would guess. The man was also sitting at the center of some kind of a candle formation, and upon seeing this, my face just went numb. I looked at the guys, and I couldn't even speak. The chanting and the screams continued, though, as I just gave them a blank stare. I couldn't even comprehend what was happening. The chanting and the screaming sounded like it had to be a total of at least 5 people, but I could only see one guy in there. I decided to take another peek, sort of mid-hand gestures and whatnot, and this time, my whole body went numb. All of the chanting and the screaming was coming from this one guy. It was like he had 5 voices at once or something. I immediately gestured to one of the guys next to me to take a look. He stepped forward and his foot accidentally brushed against the ground, making a loud scraping sound that echoed all throughout the tunnel. We all froze immediately. And then the chanting completely stopped. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was dead silent. We all looked at each other, and then, out of nowhere, we just made a sprint for the entrance all at once. None of us even said a word. We just ran and ran as fast as we could, and it felt like we were running forever because we had gone so far in. We must have hauled butt for about 10 minutes too before finally getting out of the storm tunnel. When we got out of the tunnel and we felt the fresh air on our face finally, we just stood in the field in front of the sewer there and we caught our breath. A couple of the bigger guys were throwing up from the sprinting. After we caught our breath, though, I told them everything that I saw. They were all speechless, trying to comprehend what just happened. But then we started hearing screams from the tunnel again. And this time, they were long and drawn out, almost like a howling wolf. We didn't stick around, though. We ran up the trail to the neighborhood, and we just got the heck out of there. And we also vowed to never come back here again. This all happened about 6 years ago now, and it still haunts me and the bros, even to today. I have no explanation for what happened that day. I don't know much about Satanism or occult type stuff, but if anyone does, then please feel free to give your thoughts on what you think was happening that night. I suppose that it's possible that there were more people somewhere chanting and that maybe it wasn't just one guy, but when I looked around that corner, I didn't see anybody else. I don't know, but I would really appreciate your input, and thanks for listening. This was at my boyfriend's house, where I've never felt a presence or any sort of energy at all, so I've never believed his house to be haunted or anything like that. In the early hours of the morning I woke up though, and I just laid there while I tried to get back to sleep. I sleep on the far side of the bed, next to the wall, and my boyfriend sleeps on the side closer to the door because he generally gets up more throughout the night. I heard the floor creak and footsteps to the door, so I assumed he was getting up to use the bathroom, but I didn't hear the door open or any other noise of him getting back into bed. After a few more minutes of not being able to sleep, I sat up to take a drink and I looked over towards the door to see somebody standing in the corner next to it. I stared for a while and I can just feel eyes staring back at me too, although it's too dark to really make out the detail. Thinking my boyfriend was perhaps sleepwalking or something had distracted him on his way to the bathroom, I asked him what he was doing, while looking directly at the figure. And immediately I hear my boyfriend, next to me in bed, say, "Huh?" in response. This obviously startles me. I was sure that he was the one standing in the corner. I look back and I can still see the figure in the dark. For reference, the room is fairly small and the figure is close, but it's dark and I can't make out specific features. My boyfriend is not a believer in anything paranormal, so I don't push him in his half-asleep state. I just say something weird is happening and put my head under the covers, childish, yes I know, and hope the figure just goes away. Sometime later I look back and the figure is gone, and eventually I just get back to sleep. I believe that this is the most vivid paranormal experience that I've had, with absolutely no doubt to me that there truly was a presence in that room. I know it wasn't a dream too, because my boyfriend remembers everything that was said that night. But where could this presence have come from? Could it have attached to me or just passing through the house or something? It definitely appeared to be masculine, but I didn't particularly feel threatened or anything, just really surprised by the clarity of the figure. I have no idea what it was and where it came from, but I sure hope that it doesn't come back. This story was told to me by my mother one late night playing poker with the family. I had an aunt and an uncle there who also corroborated the story. Later, my missing aunt also said that it was true, but my youngest uncle remembers nothing of it. So this took place in one of the many houses that they lived in during the late 70s, as my grandmother was a high-functioning alcoholic. My grandfather was also a high-functioning alcoholic, but more of a loner type. Now, strange things started happening around the house, like light bulbs not working, being replaced, and then not working again the next day, but not looking burnt out. My mother was the oldest at 17 during this too, and then my uncle was 15, and my twin aunts were either 11 or 12 at this time. My youngest uncle, who is 4 years older than me, was 1 or 2 when this happened. And he kept waking up screaming a lot, and not on the normal whiny cry of a child, but really wild screaming, drenched in sweat type of thing. And then it began to escalate. There was a basement in the house, and that's where my grandmother made them keep most of their toys, like a playroom kind of, because it was a full-size basement that they didn't truly need to use for basically anything else. Eventually, my aunts and uncles would come home from school and find the room completely strewn about though. Not broken or anything, but just the toys were scattered everywhere. And so they started getting angry at my youngest uncle, thinking that he was trashing it every day. But then they asked him about it, or showed it to him, and he just would deny it. Or how a young toddler would say, just no, no, no. Well, eventually, he stopped going down there altogether, screaming and such when anyone took him down to play. For a visual, the staircase was against the wall of the living room and not separated by a wall. The basement door is on the wall the staircase comes from, and it's close to the opposite side of the room. One day, my oldest uncle was coming down the stairs when he said that he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He said that he saw a strange-looking girl standing in front of the open basement door, and immediately thought one of his sisters was messing with him. He said something along the lines of, "What the hell are you doing? Trying to be scary or something?" And turned on the stairs to squarely face her, but as soon as he completed his sentence and was turning, she looked up at him and shot backwards through the basement door, and it slammed shut. He couldn't recall details of her face, but he had a lot of details on how she flew backwards. He said that it was like she just went backwards, shoulders first, facing him without making a single sound and without moving any part of her body. He said that he was scared shitless, ran back upstairs to climb out of a window into the porch roof. He jumped down from there and ran to his friend's house where he told them what happened. He said that they didn't believe him, the parents saying something along the lines of, yeah, if you have trouble at home you can stay and tell us what really happened when you're ready. But this is where the story gets even crazier, because they went to the town library to look through old newspaper reels on that projection machine. I forget its name, but it took 3 of them. One aunt wanted nothing to do with it. A week to find an article. In the 50s, there was a couple that lived there, with a daughter that had some sort of a disease that made her crippled or deformed. And the couple kept her in the basement of the house for her entire life, due to embarrassment, I guess. But no one knew about the little girl's existence until she died in that basement. And they did a story about the mysterious deformed girl found dead. It didn't even say what disease she must have had or anything, but detailed everything else as the couple was in trouble. At first, I had that shocked O face, before sliding back to a sly grin looking around at them saying, you all are just trying to scare me. And well, if I'm being honest, it succeeded and then some, as a week later, my mother took me to the library. She knew exactly where to grab the story and showed it to me. I was legitimately scared, as I felt to confirm my suspicions about the paranormal because I was a scary movie junkie. I just remember my hand shaking as I was rewinding the film with the dial, and to this day I believe that this story is actually true, and my aunts and uncles will all swear to all these events to this day, and not even close to a joking way. Though one aunt, as I said before, merely lets the others talk about it, not wanting anything to do with it, so I don't know. I believe it, and it's a bit of a creepy story.